Welcome back to Everything Whiskey. I'm Callum.
I'm Sam.
And today we'll have a look at the difference between Scotch and Bourbon.
Alrighty, so I've been seeing a couple little articles showing up on my recommended news section all the time. It's like the difference between whiskey and bourbon, or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean whiskey and bourbon? Bourbon is whiskey. So then we're doing the video. So there is no difference between whiskey and bourbon because bourbon is a type of whiskey.
What was saying bourbon is whiskey, but whiskey isn't bourbon?
What?
It has a huge overarching thing.
Yeah. It's like, so whiskey is the drink, it's the category, it's the liquid, and where it comes from is the, subcategory.
Yeah.
So Scotch is whiskey, bourbon is whiskey, Irish whiskey, Australian whiskey. Whiskey is the liquid.
Yeah.
It's like coffee. If like just because it comes from Italy, that doesn't mean it's like coffee and everywhere else is like called something else. It's coffee. The bean is a coffee bean.
Yeah.
So there's different regulations or legalities surrounding what needs to be incorporated in the recipe and the aging process to be called a Scotch or a bourbon, but they are all still whiskey.
Yeah.
Bourbon we're gonna go over just the main parts really. Bourbon is. It has to be 1, made in America, 2, it has to be at least 51% corn in the mash bill, and 3, it has to be aged in new oak barrels. So you've got that, it has to be oak and it has to be new, it has to be virgin oak barrels. And there's also there's other little regulations stuff, like it can't be distilled to, I think it's like higher than 62.5 or 63.5 and stuff. And sometimes it can come out of a barrel higher than that, but that's some weird sciencey stuff between, evaporation temperatures and that's a whole nother thing, but basically that's just one of the bourbon's regulations. Scotch does not have one of those. You can distill it, pretty damn high, like in the high 90s. But for Scotch, the regulations basically are, if it's not made in Scotland, it's not Scotch. If it's not made with a percentage of malted barley, it's not Scotch. If it's not aged in oak, not new oak, you've got more, kind of wiggle room there. It can be used oak. Most of the time they use ex-bourbon casks a lot of the time. But it still has to be oak. You look at Irish, so Irish whiskey, 0 regulations on what type of wood. Japan's new kind of committee,
We'll link this up above.
Tentative regulations we went through, which is a bit of news. We'll link it above.
Yep.
But that's basically they're not restricted to a wood type either. Scotland, kind of basically the same with bourbon, but Scotland, you can't get Scottish whiskey in a barrel and then sell it somewhere else as Scotch. Once it leaves the shores, it's either no longer legally be able to be sold as Scotch, or it's past their border as a finished product, so from a distillery already bottled as their product. So there's no messing around. You can't kind of muddy up the waters of the Scotch legacy and name by having people do shady business practices with it and pass it off as Scotch. It doesn't work. You can't do that. It's illegal.
The main difference between Scotch and bourbon is US, Scotch is Scotland.
That's basically
theoretically
it.
that's the only thing.
There's just so many misconceptions between all of them, between Scotch and bourbon, between all the subheadings of Scotch, all the subheadings of bourbon. Let's not even get into like Tennessee whiskey and stuff like that.
We can make a podcast.
We could go on for this for hours between the technicalities, between subheadings and details of different whiskies and what they like to market themselves as with boutique and small batch and stuff, which by the way legally mean nothing. You can say that no matter what. You can call it small batch even if you have 20 million barrels. It doesn't there's no legal regulations behind that. But anyway, we definitely rambled. This is just like something, there are a few things that get on our nerves just because of how I think mostly companies, as I said, the articles that shop on my feeds kind of try and lead you in a direction. So they're both whiskey. And short answer is bourbon is a whiskey and it's from America. Scotch is a whiskey and it's from Scotland. This is a big old ramble town of content, but I feel like it's something that some people
Helpful,
can benefit
I would
from.
imagine, yeah.
And if nothing else, more of a therapy session for us to be able to vent out our frustrations on the way people market things. But anyway, thank you for watching. If you liked it, leave us a like. If you want to see future episodes from us, subscribe, and that's basically
Cheers.
it. Cheers.